Hi, I have another change to report about my tank. This is it. I've been working a few days on this thing, which I'll describe further in another video. It's a new lid for my tank to go over the top. Okay? The reason for that new lid, there's a few reasons. One reason is that I never was really satisfied. This is the stock lid that came with the tank. It's plastic and it fits on the top. Has an opening here for the heater and the filter pump wires to pass through. And this edge overlaps the edges of the tank all the way around. The thing I don't particularly like about it is this hole. This hole here is primarily for the light from the original light that comes with this tank to pass through, to pass down through, because the original light sits in a bracket on this end, and it's just aluminum, and it extends out over here. So the LED lights are shining down through that hole, which is okay, but the fact that this hole is so large, it allows too much water evaporation to occur, and so you're constantly having to top off the water. I tried to remedy that by using this. I got some, it's shelf paper, it's plastic, flexible, like contact brand or something like that. And what I did was I cut it to fit over this hole. And so when I put the lid on the tank, basically I would have this just sitting over that hole. This slit here is to allow my airline tubing from the air stone to come up through here and through that slit and to the air pump. Because since this overlaps the edge of the tank, there's no way I could slip the air hose in there without having to come through the hole that way. And so that was working for a while, this setup. But then I found out about this new light that had more different light spectrums. Instead of just the white and the blue, which the stock light has, it has white, blue, red, and green. And you can use them in different combinations, and particularly the red is supposed to be supposedly better for photosynthesis for your plants. And so I wanted to try that out. I could not use, after having gotten this light, I could not use this lid anymore because the light has two stands which ideally clip on to the edges of the glass. Clip on and sit on the edges of the glass, and kind of, you can clamp them in on both sides. What that does though is, since this lid overlaps the edges, it doesn't allow for me to use the clip-on mounting method or the clamping mounting method of this light, which is much more sturdy. You can slide these in and just have the light sitting on top of the lid, but it's not fastened and it's not sturdy, so I'm always afraid it'll tip over or be knocked over or something. So that wasn't really a solution for me to continue using this lid. So what I did, in the last few days was I went over to Tap Plastics, which is just not very far from me at all, and looked in the scrap bin and found just one piece, 1/4 inch acrylic, which was a size that was a little bit longer and a little bit wider than the top of my tank. And so I thought, oh, I could use that as a cover. But then I thought, I want to make sure it stays and doesn't kind of slide all over the place. You know, if I just lay it on there, lay it on there like that, it could slide, all over the place if you didn't do something. And so what I did was I found some 1/4 inch square rods at Tap Plastics, and then I asked the guy, how do I attach these? How do I glue it to this acrylic? And so he showed me, he gave me a demo, which was very nice of him, that you just clamp whatever you want to glue, clamp it together, and then you run a very thin, it's a very thin needle, bead of acrylic cement, which is like a very thin super glue. You just run it along the inside corner, and as you do that, the glue is so thin it just wicks under between the square tubing and the main piece of acrylic, and it just wicks under. And this glue, what it does is it melts the plastic on both the square tube and the sheet, and it just instantly bonds, melts them together. And so I went home, and what I did was I fashioned it so that the insides of these square rod are flush against the outside of the glass. And so that way, it can't move. It won't move once it's set on there. It just goes like this. Okay, so it doesn't move. I gave a little leeway just to be safe. So the first stage of my top was just this glued to the plate. Okay. But then I started thinking, gee, I want, it's not too difficult just to take it off every time I needed to feed the fish or get into the tank with a tool or with my hands. But it's kind of a hassle. Oh, another reason that I had to measure it a certain way was that because of the stand, the clips for the light that are clipped onto the glass at both ends, this has to be measured or sized just short of that to allow, for that. And so it works out great though, because then I have an opening here, a slight opening where I can just slip the airline tubing down. And it allows an opening here for the heater and the filter pump cords to come through. And so that worked out great. But then I started thinking, well, it's kind of a hassle to pull this out or to hold it up every time that I need to get in the tank. And so I started thinking, how can I have some kind of lid? The first thing I thought of was cutting it and just putting hinge so I could lift the front half. But then, since this is not supported on the sides, as in a framed tank, you have that black, there's a lip that comes out on the inside. And so that's what the lids sit on. But I don't have that here. And so with it not supported on the sides, if I hinged it, it would kind of cave in and fall down because there's no support here. And so I thought, and it suddenly occurred to me today, well, what if I cut a hole on the inside of the lid and have a hinged access cover that way. You know, just lift it up, and there's a little piece of acrylic glued on the bottom here so that it will not fall through when you put it down. It rests against that. And when it's in there, okay, this light is such that has a neat feature of you can pivot it back to make access into the tank easier without having to remove the light every time. So I can just lift this up, and it allows the lid, my little access cover lid, to open up a little further, and I can reach in. So, you know, to feed the fish, if I really need to get in there and do some things with tools inside there, I'll probably take the light off, because this doesn't allow me to really move, to reach into all the different parts easily. But it's fine for feeding. Sometimes when I feed the fish, I crush the flakes, the fish flakes, into very small pieces for the neons. And then, instead of just popping them in there, because they don't tend to feed on the surface, I reach down and kind of put it under the surface of the water, so it'll float down. If I just dropped it, it'll just float on the surface, which will take a lot of time for them to sink down for the fish. So for feeding the fish, or for dosing with liquids or chemicals or anything I need to do, or medications, that's perfect. And I won't have to take this lid off every time. Again, if I need to do some maintenance or trimming or things like that, it's easy enough to take this lid off. What I did do was I did glue the square rod onto the two edges, and I was pretty proud of myself for doing that. It was kind of fun, just letting the glue wick in there, and it worked. When I came up today with this idea of, well, why not an access cover, hinged cover cut into the middle of the acrylic, I thought, well, if I try it, I could. You just drill some holes and then you use a bandsaw or something. Well, no, I'd have to use a jigsaw, probably. I knew I'd mess it up. I wouldn't get a nice straight cuts. I could try using a router, but again, routers I'm not too familiar with, and they kind of scare me. Because also you don't want to square. I learned at Tap Plastics today, you don't want to just cut square, because that creates a kind of stress point at square corners, and so that's why they're rounded. So anyway, I went to Tap Plastics and asked the guy who had helped me the day before to explain to me how to glue this rod on, if they could do it for me, because I know they would know how to do it and do it correctly and do it well. And it cost me a little bit, about $40, but it was well worth it. He cut this out with a router, okay, and then he attached two plastic hinges or acrylic hinges, and just glued a little cube on there. And then he also put, it's about a 1/16 inch, a piece of acrylic on the bottom here, extending a little bit out, looks like about a 1/4 inch into the hole right there, so that when you put the lid down, it won't fall through. It just stays put. And so I'm just so pleased with it. 1/4 inch acrylic, it's pretty heavy. You know, it almost feels like glass, and yet it's much easier to work with than glass. And so that's where it stands. So I'm really happy with how it turned out, and that I finally found a solution to my need for some kind of access hole. So my problems are solved. I have a little feeding access cover. I have this on both sides, which allows my air hose to go through and my cords to come out. I have room for clamping the stands for this light on, and the light can go through, and water will not evaporate as much or as quickly. So that's a major change that's happened in a couple of days. Next, I'll talk to you about the light, this new light, which is pretty nifty. Okay, bye-bye.